This is Pixelated Audio, episode 83, and today we're going to be listening to the music of BlaZeon for the arcade.
All right, welcome back to the bi-weekly video game music and retro gaming podcast, Pixelated Audio. We're your hosts. I'm Brian, and this is James.
Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be playing music and talking about BlaZeon for the arcade and briefly mention the SNES port.
I'm excited. This is a really cool soundtrack. It's short, sweet. It's got all the things that just kind of peg us as an awesome soundtrack for the show. It's, FM. It's very crunchy and gritty and a lot of action.
Yeah, and after that last episode, I think something short and to the point was going to be just what we need.
Yeah. That track that brought us in. So usually, we like to start with like an opening track or something that really kind of gets the game kind of progressing,
Right. It makes sense to start with an opening track most of the time because that's the track they pick to introduce the game to all the viewers and all the players. But today we did something a little bit different.
Yeah. So we came in with the Stage Clear track. It's called Next Step. And it's a short track, so it was like, why not? It's really punchy. It's got that 80s synthy vibe.
Yeah.
I liked it.
It feels a little Konami Turtles to me a little bit. But yeah, it's energetic, fun. It gives you a good feeling that you beat a level because it's not easy.
Yeah. So we actually played this game together last night. We did a stream, and we had a lot of fun. So going through and listening to the music, kind of diving into the details is going to be fun for us, And if you want to go back and check out that stream, it'll be up for a while. Anyway, so BlaZeon is a horizontal shooter developed by A.I Co and published by Atlus in 1992 for the arcade, originally a Japanese-only release. Atlus ported the game over to the SNES for Japan and the US shortly after, in the same year, 1992.
Now, A.I Co is a relatively small dev studio, about 30 people or so, based in Tokyo, and have worked on over 30 different games, most notably for the Bomberman, Bonk, and Super Robot Tyson series. Most recently, in 2013, they worked on Super Robot Tyson games for the 3DS, and Kokoro Connect, which is a visual novel based on the anime for the PSP in 2012.
Yeah, now Atlus shouldn't be foreign to anyone.
Right.
Especially if you're into JRPGs. It's a Japanese game developer and publisher that produced some rock-solid games like the Megami Tensei, Persona, Etrian Odyssey, Growlancer, and the Trauma Center series.
And interestingly enough, BlaZeon is their first arcade title.
Right. They were founded in 1986 and stood on their own until they got acquired by Takara, a Japanese toy company, in 2003. And then 3 years later, in 2006, it was acquired or kind of merged with an information and communication tech company called Index Holdings. However, Index Holdings stated that they would dissolve Atlus, as a company, but continue the brand in the same fashion that it existed before. Okay, so you may or may not remember, but just a few years ago in 2013, Index Holdings, now called Index Corporation, filed for bankruptcy. You might not remember that part, but Sega saw this and they jumped on it and purchased the company.
Yeah, we were following this very closely because we have a huge love for Atlus and we're really worried about the future of the company.
Like who's going to buy them and what's going to, what are they going to turn into?
Right.
Anyway, so Sega purchased the company and they split Atlus, the company by itself, back out of Index. And now it runs as a subsidiary of Sega.
Yeah, which is probably the best option we could have hoped for, that now Sega owns Atlus and is letting Atlus do their own thing. It's not like they're like, you're going to do what we want you to do. It's like, we respect what you're going to do. We like what you've been doing, right, and we're just going to let you do it.
Yeah, and like Persona 5 is a very good example of that. Like, that's a massive game that they spent years working on.
Right.
And, Sega's just kind of, do your guys' thing. You guys are doing rock solid stuff. Keep it going. Anyways, let's get into our first kind of track of the day. This is called Optimistic Departure, and it plays during stage 1, but it's also kind of the intro or attract mode for the game as well. Composed by Tsukasa Masuko.
You just heard Optimistic Departure, composed by Tsukasa Masuko for BlaZeon in the arcade.
Now, this is another kind of 80s throwback track. It does sound like a shooter. It really gives me that vibe.
Yeah.
Not just because of the game, but it just has that I don't know, like flying in an aircraft, shooting things, shooting asteroids kind of feel.
Yeah, it kind of has that like very full galloping feel that it gives me a little bit of like this space sense, and it's not overwhelming. It's kind of galloping and a little bit fun. It's even kind of mellow in comparison to a lot of what you think shooter soundtracks sound like. But
right.
I thought this was a great start to this game to where you don't feel overwhelmed and you kind of get your bearings, and I thought it just fit really nicely.
Yeah, but it does still retain a lot of action. It has, that opening cutscene that we'll talk about a little more later. It really fits with that, and it kind of gets you excited to jump right into the ship and start playing. I did notice the one thing about this track that seemed out of place, but it sounded really cool, was the xylophone kind of in the background. Did you hear that?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. You want to listen to that?
Oh yeah.
Hold on. Let's see if I can find it here. Not sure what channels. Oh, it's channels 3 and 5.
Nice. Yeah, it really stands out once you start turning the channels off.
Yeah. You almost don't hear it at first, but I've listened to the song so many times now.
Right.
That's so cool.
It sounds like something from like The Little Mermaid or something like that.
Oh yeah. Kind of a little Caribbean feel to it. That's pretty awesome. Anyways, why don't you tell us a little bit about this composer?
All right. So Tsukasa Masuko, also known as Mako, is a composer and a sound engineer best known for his work at Atlus. However, he started out at Tecmo in 1984 doing music for a few of their arcade titles like Bomb Jack, Star Force, Tekken World Cup, and Rygar.
Yep, and then in 1986, he jumped ship during development of Mighty Bomb Jack on the NES to join Atlus, where he went nuts doing music for a ton of titles. Just a few here: The Karate Kid, Zixies, Friday the 13th, Quirk, Bio Senshi Dan, and Labyrinth, the Maze of the Goblin King, which we did on our Bowie tribute.
Right.
God, that was... I mean, what a weird title, right?
Yeah, it was a weird series of games. I mean,
I didn't even know it existed until we were like, oh, well.
It was a weird movie, so I can see that not translating too great.
Yeah. Anyways, he also did Dungeon Explorer, which is this really cool kind of rogue, well, more like a Gauntlet-style top-down multiplayer game.
Yeah.
And he's also responsible for the Megami Tensei series, starting with Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei, all the way up to Devil Summoner Soul Hackers. So most of those early games he is the sole composer on. Now, for his NES music, he actually wrote all the drivers that he used because he's also a sound engineer.
Right.
And so a lot of those soundtracks, like Zixies and Friday the 13th, really have strong soundtracks and have beautiful audio. And, it's all his hardcore engineering work. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you build your own programs, you know them better than anyone, and they're probably built for a specific task to do it a certain way and certain sounds that you can produce, and that just creates the best music.
Yep. Anyway, so let's get into our next track. This is called Cosmic Ocean Blue. It's from Stage 2, the first section of Stage 2, composed by Tsukasa Masuko. All right, that was Cosmic Ocean Blue from Stage 2, the first section, composed by Tsukasa Masuko for BlaZeon in the arcade.
Now, at first, this track doesn't seem like it's a whole lot to listen to. I mean, it has like some big hits, and it's got those computer noises going back and forth.
Right.
But I really like how this song builds. I think it's fun to listen to both in the game and out of the game, maybe while you're doing something. I mean, not just focusing on the music, but if you have some other activity you're doing, I think this is a good song that can kind of, keep your mind going. And I just like how the track really starts to build towards the end, and it has those scales and the hits and everything like that right before the loop. It's a really nice track.
Yeah, it's not as action oriented as you would think for a shooter, but
right.
Every time I listen to it now, I keep hearing the Capcom jingle. I hear that every single time now. But I really like it. I think it's slower pace. It's got kind of really pretty scales in the background, very soft instruments. A lot of the soundtrack isn't that way. It's a little more brash.
Right.
So kind of hearing this track sounds a little bit more like desolate, a little more like lost in space kind of feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and we'll get into how this game works, but I think that this kind of more laid back feel compared to what you would expect from a shooter game actually really works well for this game. I think it helps stand out and work to the strong points that this game does differently.
Yeah, and it definitely ramps up. So this is only stage 2, and this is only the first section of stage 2. So there's a lot more insanity to come. But I did get a chance to talk to Tsukasa Masuko for a little while. Not sure why, but we ended up talking more about food than game music.
I think that happens a lot.
That happens a lot. And anyways, he said that the music for BlaZeon was written 100% in assembly. Well, machine code for the YM2151. That it was more like building a soundtrack than actually composing, because he had to type all the songs in by, using hexadecimal. So he explained that he had to write his own driver, which was kind of a pain. But the merit was that he could directly use all of the hardware without taking a performance hit. And of course, this is all written out using a PC 9801.
It's very cool. Awesome. Yeah. It's always great to find out these little fun tidbits. I mean, you kind of assume how things work, and maybe their feelings about how the process was, especially typing things out in hexadecimal and stuff like that. But to hear it straight from them that, it wasn't exactly the most fun experience, but that you got to kind of do it the way you wanted to do it was really neat.
Yeah, and it's funny because I asked him, I said, hey, would you, want to be on a show? And he's like, oh, I'd love to. I'm really busy right now, so it didn't work out for this one. But he's also like, why BlaZeon? Like, I've done all these these other titles that people always ask me about, but why BlaZeon? I said, why not?
Yeah.
Why not BlaZeon? It's a really good soundtrack, and he actually is really fond of it too. The YM2151, I feel like we've talked about it a lot of times on the show, but I think we've only lightly covered it in favor of talking more about like the sampling chips that it was combined with. So this might be a good time to kind of revisit the hardware in detail. So the Yamaha YM2151, aka the OPM, is an 8-channel 4-operator FM synthesis chip, and it was actually Yamaha's first single chip originally created for the DX series of their keyboards and budget pianos. Its largest use was in arcade boards that first started with Marble Madness by Atari in 1984, and then Sega boards starting in 1985, and later arcades from Konami, Capcom, Data East, and Namco. You guys would also remember its use in the Sharp X68000 and the Sharp X1.
Yeah, I mean, it was even used in pinball cabinets. Yep. That's really neat.
Yeah, they used it in a lot of pinball cabinets, actually. In fact, our next Pinball Volume 2 will probably look more into the actual pinball cabinets.
Yeah, I think that would be a very fun and different take on a pinball episode.
Yeah. So the YM2151 is usually paired with one of 2 DACs. There's either the YM3014 for mono, or more common in later use, the YM3012 stereo DAC. However, the left and right channel manipulation all takes place on the 2151's accumulator function before it even gets to the DAC. So, it's whatever you wanted to pair with it, maybe cost reasons, or maybe you only had one speaker in the cabinet, or whatever. You could pair it with either one. But either way, it's a pure 8-voice FM chip with phase, envelope, and noise generation, temporary timbre alteration, the ability to deharmonize between octaves and add vibrato with amplitude modulation, and also generate numerous sound effects by creating extreme deharmonization of the high harmonics from the bass frequency, and also use extreme vibrato and amp modulations. Now, this is a little bit technical.
Just a little bit.
But as we kind of listen to the soundtrack, I think you'll spot some of these interesting techniques that he does with the sound chip, and how it enhances the sound of the audio that that we're hearing today.
Yeah, I mean, I always like when we talk about the chips kind of earlier in the episode, so then you can keep that in mind while you're listening to the upcoming tracks, and it kind of gives you something else to listen for.
Right. Well, let's actually jump ship over to the Super Nintendo version and listen to the same track. This is Cosmic Ocean Blue, and then we'll kind of look at the difference between the two.
You just heard the Super Nintendo version of Cosmic Ocean Blue for BlaZeon.
This is it's a little bit weaker.
Yeah, a little weaker. It feels a little slower.
You know what it's missing is the those toms at the end when it kind of builds up. Those are really pronounced in the FM version, and here they almost sound non-existent.
Yeah, the beginning of that build up at the end is kind of wimpy. But overall, this track is still really good, and I think that if this was the only version that you heard, which if you've heard the soundtrack, there's a good chance that this is the only version you've heard, since you probably didn't play it in the arcades in Japan.
Yeah.
But I still think it's a really solid track.
Yeah, I think the Super Nintendo version isn't bad. I just don't think it's even a fraction as good as the arcade version.
Of course,
so that's why we're focusing on the arcade mostly today. And we'll get into the SNES hardware more on another show that kind of focuses solely on the Super Nintendo. But basically, the sound chip is the SPC 700 or the SSMP. It's a sample-based sound chip, 8 simultaneous voices at any relevant pitch, and volume in the 16-bit stereo at a sample rate of 32 kilohertz. Quite different or unconventional actually from most sound chips, because what it does is it uses this boot ROM running when the unit is powered on, and the main CPU uses this ROM to kind of transfer codes and sound samples and stuff to the RAM. So it really relies on the main CPU to get actually, any data.
Right.
Anyways, the whole point of explaining this was just so you can see that both sound chips, they both have 8 voices, but they couldn't be more different from each other.
Right.
And how the audio sounds, right? And for the SNES port, though, all the music from the arcade was added, including the ending track. However, in the Super Nintendo actual game, once you beat it, it loops after the final boss, so you never actually hear it.
Right.
And so I was looking on the cutting room floor, and they actually have this hex code I think you have to change. You can actually listen to the music. So it was included. It just, the design was a little bit different, so you never actually hear it.
Yeah, I always hate it when games do that anyway. When you beat the boss, the final boss,
and there's nothing.
Then it just loops right back to the starting. And it's like, what?
Yeah, I think
why did you do that? But then that there was an ending track and that they basically accidentally skipped over it.
Right.
I just think it's so silly.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about the differences between the two versions a little bit later. Now, I did ask Masuko-san about the Super Nintendo port. He told me, he's like, I had no idea about it until after it was released.
Right.
So I asked him, well, if you didn't port the music over, who did? And he was like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
He said it might be Toshiko Tasaki, maybe,
right,
but unsure. I mean, he definitely composed the music, but it wasn't him that actually did the conversion to Super Nintendo. Right. So when he heard it, he's like, oh man, this is kind of sad. So, whatever. Anyways, let's get into the second section of stage 2. This track is called Alpha.
You just heard Alpha, or Stage 2's second section, composed by Tsukasa Masuko for BlaZeon in the arcade.
Incredible track. Now, I love this.
Yeah.
It's got so much fuzz to it. It reminds me of like a really I don't know, it kind of reminds me of like a Van Halen track.
Yeah,
a
little
little
bit.
bit. Yeah, I don't know. I just, when I first heard it, I was like, man, that distortion on the guitar is so intense. I could tell what he was going for. I think there was just a lot of like 80s rock set late 70s 80s rock vibe in this track, and I thought it was excellent.
Oh yeah, I mean, at this point in the game, it feels like the game just got started.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
So I guess by proxy, then this episode just got started.
Well, and this is the point in the game too where me and you were finally starting to figure things out a little bit more.
Yeah.
And before this, it was all kind of doable.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, as far as doable is for a arcade shooter. But I mean, this is so 80s, so edgy and aggressive, and which is very different than those first two tracks that we listened to.
Right.
And that guitar, the bending, and all the echoes, and everything going on was just so nuts.
Right,
and so good.
Right. What about that guitar solo though, man?
Yeah.
Wasn't that
It
awesome?
was so great.
You want to listen to that real quick?
Yeah.
I want to see. I think it's channel 1 and 2. Ooh.
Yeah, that's insane.
That's insane.
So good.
It's like a dude with a flying V. Just, I love it. So wild. No, I mean, this is clearly inspired by something.
Right.
I was saying Van Halen just because that it just reminds me of some kind of Van Halen solo, but no, excellent track. When I first heard this though, I was like, man, I've heard this before, not from this game. I was like, what does this sound like? And I kind of drew my own, I connected the dots myself here. And so have you ever heard of TNC Surf?
Yeah.
For the NES?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Do you remember that in-game track?
No, but I'm sure if I listen to it again,
you will. Listen to a few seconds here.
Yeah, I can see some similarities.
You can see some similarities, right? Developed by Atlus,
Yeah,
right? And composed by Tsukasa Masuko.
yeah.
So
he was inspired a little bit by himself, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was just like, wait a minute, it's the same composer. That's
Yeah.
and it's funny because I was listening in the car to this track, and I was like, wait a minute, where do I know this? And of course, I didn't, but I heard this soundtrack, and I was like, okay, let me go back and listen to TNC Surf, because I played the hell out of that game.
Oh yeah, TNC Surf is you are always talking about the music from that game.
Yeah. So, and there's really only that one track.
Right.
I mean, it was kind of so, like, I guess tattooed in my head that, I kind of put the pieces together and figured it out. Anyways, I thought it was still a wicked guitar solo, though, either way. Anyways, so let's talk about this. Let's finally talk about this game a little bit. There's kind of a story around it, right?
Yeah, with a lot of these shooters, there's always kind of a story.
Right. Now, I don't know. Now, this is an arcade. This is the arcade version of the story, right? Or does it even matter?
I'm not sure if it really matters.
Yeah, it probably doesn't. It's probably not that deep anyway. So what do you got?
Yeah, so the Imperial Earth Army, which is a United Space Force, was out on a mission in the solar system somewhere, and they returned with a large living robot called a bio-cyborg, which is not really a great name, but they're extremely powerful. So powerful, in fact, that the Imperial Earth Army decided to use them to dominate and oppress rival societies on Earth. So your job as a player is to launch a surprise attack on the bio-cyborgs and the Imperial Earth Army. Your weapon of choice is a recently developed weapon capable of controlling the bio-cyborgs, but don't get your hopes up too much, because this ship is a substandard space fighter called a Garland TFF-01 and is only equipped with a rapid-fire laser or a beam Vulcan and the Tranquilander, which we'll get into what the Tranquilander is.
You can't even say that.
Yeah, the Tranquilander.
Tranquilander.
Yeah, Tranquilander. We'll get into what that is when we get into more of the gameplay, but it actually plays a unique feature in this game.
Right. This story is weak.
It's pretty typical.
Yeah.
Someone comes, usually it's aliens. This one, it's your own people go and come back, and they decide, hey, we're so powerful now, we're going to take over. But with the name Imperial in anything, it's probably going to end up being bad guys.
Yeah. All right, so let's take a break here and get into our next track. This is from Stage 3. It's called Infinite World.
You just heard Infinite World, or Stage 3, composed by Tsukasa Masuko for BlaZeon in the arcade.
This is an incredible, probably my favorite track so far. And it's, I don't know, that bass so strong that the tone is just, it's crunchy. It's got a lot of distortion on it. And it just, I don't know, it just drives the whole track, the whole soundtrack really.
Yeah.
In that bass line.
Yeah, I loved how in this track you obviously survive stage 2, which was very aggressive and dangerous at the ending. And so now you're kind of rewarded with this little bit more mellow, kind of like "You're awesome, you did it" track. And then it's really kind of bizarre too, because there's that distortion where it feels like almost like warped in a way. Then it does start to get a little bit more menacing in a part towards the end, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm in a game that's going to try to kill me.
Yeah.
So I really like that this track kind of in the beginning rewards you and kind of calms you down, but then it kind of ushers you back into the danger zone.
Yeah. It does have like a groove to it.
Mm-hmm.
It does have like it's kind of a relaxed feeling. That distorted guitar, that lead is it's extremely fuzzy, but it's got like this kind of mellowness to it at the same time. And I'm glad you brought that up, because the first part, that guitar, actually does a lot of really cool things with the tone and the different effects that the chip can do. Do you want to listen to that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's solo that out real quick.
Yeah, this definitely seems like a good track to display what this chip could do.
Okay, so here's just that first channel by itself. And this is the lead, so. Do you hear that whoa, 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 that phase?
Yeah, it's
really
such
neat.
a cool little effect.
Yeah. Sorry if that's a little bit piercing, but it's still really cool. You want to hear it one more time? Just that one part?
It does kind of sound a little bit like cats being slowly murdered, but...
Just pay real close attention to those effects.
Yeah, super cool. It adds so much to this track as far as that eerie feeling and something that's not quite right, but it still all goes together so well.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of pick that out, because you listen to it by itself and you can hear all these really odd effects that sound, not only like the distorted guitar, but you hear these other kind of effect distortions and stuff that's going on, and it changes like the whole feel of the track, but it's kind of something that's maybe not the first thing that's audible while you're playing,
right?
But it still really adds so much. Anyways, so we've talked about the story and stuff that doesn't really matter,
right?
But BlaZeon itself, when you look at it at face value, it's kind of your typical arcade horizontal shooter,
right?
Nothing really special there, but there is some things that kind of enhance the gameplay a little bit.
Yeah, and one of those unique features, and probably the best part about the entire game, is that after some enemies are shot with a sub-weapon on your basic ship or the Tranquilander.
Oh, you said it, yeah.
Yeah, they become able to be captured, and this allows you to take the shape and the ability of that enemy, which is really rad.
Yeah, it's almost like hijacking the actual vehicle.
Yeah, and the enemy will become just an outline once they've been tranquilanded, and all you
I like how that's like a verb now.
Yeah, and so all you have to do at that point is just fly into its shape, and it'll stay on the screen. It'll scroll with the screen, but so you can kind of wait to strategically jump into the ship if you want. But you take on all the weapons and the abilities of that enemy, but you also take on their damage too. So if you've damaged the ship pretty heavily beforehand, their gun may not be as high quality as it would have been had it been pristine. But this is still a really awesome feature and just makes this game stand out.
Yeah, that actually brings up a good thing. When we were playing yesterday, we would notice that I would take over I would tranquiland a vehicle.
Yeah.
And you would do the same thing for the same kind of vehicle or enemy or whatever, and we would notice our weapons would be different. We're like, what's going on here? And my guy would have a gun and yours wouldn't. We'd be like, what did we do? And then we realized...
And your blast radius would be bigger than mine.
Right. And we realized that, depending on how much damage you do, it affects the ability of that mech or that vessel. And so that was kind of cool. That was kind of a cool aspect. Yeah, and this is quite similar to Gyari's actually, but the difference is that you actually change into the vehicle or mech rather than just changing your weapon system around, which is kind of cool thing.
Yeah, and this allows you to take more hits than your normal little ship's one-hit death and affects your movement, and which, that can be good or bad.
Yeah, some of those ships suck, but we'll talk about those in a second.
Yeah, so that's the basic mechanics of this game, but it's not exactly very easy, and to kick that up another notch, you have to worry about more than just enemies and their bullets. At times, you have to travel through these very tight maze-like obstacles that will kill you if you rub it against the walls.
Yeah, the hitboxes are like, it's like pixel perfect. There's no like leverage or there's no room for error. Like if you barely brush up against anything, your vehicle gets completely sliced in half. And I say it doesn't blow up, it like slices. It's very odd.
It's a cool little animation, but some of those little obstacles in the maze areas are definitely not big enough for some of the bio cyborgs that you've taken over, so you end up losing your cyborg really quickly.
Yeah, I streamed the game the day before we played together, and I was just trying to figure out, I was like, oh my god, how do we get through these areas? There's like asteroids all over the place. And it took me like 5 or 6 attempts to figure out what I was supposed to do because the areas are so confined.
Right.
So yeah, it gets really rough.
Yeah, and on top of that, enemy placement intensifies this by forcing you to make life or death strategic decisions on the fly. But all's not lost. If you have access to the dip switches of this game, you can enable one of the lower of the 4 difficulty settings. There's easy, normal, hard, and hardest. In the arcade version, there are infinite continues, which is nice if you have infinite quarters.
Yes, which we did because we played a MAME.
Thankfully.
Yeah, and we have access to all the dip switches. Now, we left them standard because we want to see what was a normal playthrough. And it is challenging, man. And you were saying the enemy placement intensifies the games, the frustration, I'd say, because they're placed really well, but they're also placed really like inconvenient and
which makes
annoyingly
they're well placed, but that means it's not good for the player. I mean, there's so many times where like you can't shoot them because they're hiding behind an asteroid, or they're tucked up in a way to where if you try to go shoot them, you're going to hit the wall and you're going to die. So it's you. And then you have to fly by them because you didn't kill them, and they're going to shoot you. So
plus, you only shoot forward unless you've basically taken over another vehicle. You only shoot in one direction, straight forward. So if an enemy's above you in an area that you can't get to, you can never shoot him. So it makes it really difficult. And Atlus and AI were kind of jerks in that regard. The game's really hard. The Super Nintendo port, we played that together a little bit last night as well. I don't know. It's not that it's a horrible game. It just pales in comparison.
Right.
I think there's a bunch of differences too. The animated opening we were kind of talking about earlier, that was completely yanked out.
Yeah.
The console version,
which is one of the coolest parts of the beginning of the game.
That's like the best part of the whole game, I think. Also, 2-player co-op was removed,
which is very odd.
That doesn't make any sense. That seems like more likely to need a 2-player mode than the arcade. A lot of enemies were cut out from the SNES. In Stage 3, there's these like walker enemies. Those were removed. When you're flying through in different levels, ships and different obstacles will, kind of break apart and different animations will occur. It makes it like this really nice eye candy. In the Super Nintendo version, those are all just yanked out.
Yeah, which is understandable when you're porting something from the arcade to an early system. But, I mean, some of the changes they were making were very odd.
Yeah, and it just, I don't know, it just felt kind of second rate. It didn't really, like, it felt choppy, it felt slower. It was actually way easier than, like, I think I made it through, like, the first 2 levels without even getting hit.
Yeah.
And the arcade version, I was, like, already on, like, my 5th continue by the end of level 1. So,
right.
It's a big difference. I would say if you're going to play the game, pop it in MAME and enjoy it that way because it's definitely a better experience. It's harder, but it's a better experience. Anyways, let's get into some more music. We have some boss music lined up. This is called Unlimited Attack, and this is from the mid-boss area.
You just heard the mid-boss theme called Unlimited Attack, composed by Tsukasa Masuko for BlaZeon in the arcade.
This is a really brash track. It starts off really menacing, kind of what you would expect. You know, it's got these kind of mid-bossy sounds.
Yeah.
But then it just gets so like wild and like scratchy, and I like that. I really enjoy that.
Yeah, this definitely started out as kind of a typical boss or mid-boss theme. It definitely felt kind of dark and menacing, and like you kind of felt like, like this is not going to be good. But then it definitely kicked up a notch with all those trailing notes that went down. It was like, right. Oh man, this is getting kind of scary almost. And just the name too, the Unlimited Attack, that does not sound good for someone you want to take on. But I really like this track a lot. The mid bosses definitely felt like bosses. I mean, they were not easy.
They were rough, and I mean this track, you know, it's hard to concentrate because really, if you haven't made it to the mid boss with a vehicle and you're using like your standard ship, you're basically not doing a whole lot of damage, and so you're just frantically mashing on the buttons.
Yeah.
There's no auto fire, man. This is like old school arcade, right?
Yeah.
So you're just like using every muscle you have in your forearm to just try to get, you know, some damage on this thing, and you're doing very little. But this track, you know what it kind of reminds me of is, imagine like Transformers having a fist fight in a metal scrapyard. It's just so I don't know, it's so raunchy and so metallic sounding.
Yeah, it's definitely very dark, and it does have that kind of robot sound to it, I think, which is very cool. So let's move on to our next track, which is the main boss theme called Intimidating Spaces.
All right, that was Intimidating Spaces, the boss theme for BlaZeon in the arcade, composed by Tsukasa Masuko.
This track is really a really good style boss track. I liked how in the beginning it's dark and menacing like you would expect.
It starts off a lot like the mid boss theme,
right?
Where it's like no,
yeah,
meow 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 meow.
Yeah, and then it just goes insane. Like there's just the guitar comes in and it goes crazy, and just so much stuff is going on. But one of the things I really liked about this track was that this didn't feel necessarily just evil. It had like this good and evil feel to it. So it wasn't just, oh my god, this is like just the boss's theme, this is so dark and you're going to die. It kind of had this heroicness to it that kind of was kind of like this driving force to like just keep going and keep fighting, which I really liked in this.
Yeah, it was like somebody whispering in your ear, like go for it.
Yeah, like this is a theme for you and for the boss.
Yeah, no, I thought this track is really cool. I mean, it's like you said, dark. It does kind of remind me of that mid-boss. I think it starts the same way. And then you get that solo. Those guitar runs are just they're so pretty, and just, man, again, that 80s rock is just coming out. I love it. It's just coming out of my veins. Oh, and do you want to hear that solo real quick?
Yeah,
let's listen to that real quick.
Yeah.
Jeez, it's like an evil carnival.
Yeah. Well, that pitch bending and stuff really, and how grungy it is, really reminds me of Maximum Carnage on the Sega Genesis. Like, it had guitars that were like that. It was just so nuts. And they were very prominent. So it really reminds me of that.
You know what's funny is that as harsh as this track sounds, there's something funny on Channel 3. It kind of sounds like a baseball game. Listen to this. Next up to bat, is James Brunner.
Yeah, got your peanuts.
I almost didn't even hear this part.
Yeah,
you can barely make it out.
Yeah, that's a good catch. It's so funny that this track is very insane, but then there's this like very kind of fun kind of sound in the background hidden.
Yeah. So the bosses, when you're actually fighting these guys, it's kind of interesting the way the mechanics work, right?
Yeah.
So you're on like a timer system.
Yeah, the way that it works is when you enter the boss room, there's a timer. It's really kind of a score at the bottom, so it's not like straight up like a clock. There's like a large number, and it's counting down very quickly. And you don't have to actually kill the boss. The idea is that you would kill the boss very quickly by having one of those cyborg upgrades to your ship,
right? And
you'd be able to kill him very quickly, and then you get the points at the end. But if you can't kill him, or if you're in one of those basic ships that aren't doing very much damage, the goal is then just to survive until the timer runs out and you get 0 bonus points, basically.
Right. It makes it really challenging because when you and I played, we almost never got to the boss with one of those suits, or if we did, we lost it very early.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like just racing the clock to see like, wow, like how can I make it around without getting completely pelted by missiles, bullets, shards, like fragments of other, ships and stuff. Just basically survive this thing as the timer counts down. Sometimes the bonus points are so high, they start off so high, that you're in this battle for 4 or 5 minutes.
Right, and you're just trying to stay alive. And we did notice that there were a few times where we made it to the boss with some of these upgrades, and it did make a huge difference. Even if we only had it for 10, 15 seconds, we were able to get through the battle much, much faster. So being able to keep it for the entire time, I'm sure these boss fights wouldn't actually not be that bad. But adding to that, I guess the bosses had destructible parts, and the bosses would react differently based on which parts that you destroyed. So you could kind of force their patterns, or if you ended up destroying something you weren't quite used to, if you're playing the game a lot, you could cause the boss to act in a way that was very different, which I thought was a very neat idea to program into it. That it's like, okay, I'm going to shoot this blaster, but if I shoot this one first, he might react a little differently, which I thought was very cool.
Very cool, but I do feel like the bosses were pretty cheap. Like, there's no way they could expect you to play through some of that. I don't care how good you are.
Especially the final boss.
Yeah, I don't care how good you are. It's like, I mean, I wonder how many quarters, we should have counted, like how many quarters we actually went through on that.
Well, we could go back and watch the stream, I guess.
Oh, yeah, we should do that. It's got to be like 30 at least. That was a lot. But yeah, depending on what vehicle you arrive with, it really changes how the gameplay is. And those vehicles are very critical. I really like the guy that did the 3-way shot. That was Mars something.
Yeah.
They all have names. Right?
Yeah. And you might be expecting there's only a couple, maybe 3 or 4 that you can take advantage of. But there's quite a few in this game. And they all have, even though the game doesn't have much of a backstory, they all have like these serial number type names, but then they have like a main name. Like the one that you mentioned, Mars, his serial number is BCF008, but he just goes by Mars. So we'll list off all of their like actual names, not their numbered names. But yeah, Mars has a 3-way spread shot and like this encircling bomb that was very powerful. You kind of get close to even like a boss, and you just surround yourself in like this
flame
explosion
kind of thing. Yeah.
But then there's also Shadow Blade, which is the one that we mentioned earlier that's really small, and it moves so rapidly that it's a huge pain to use, but it can become invincible for like 10 seconds or something like that, which could actually be really helpful in some of those tight maze areas.
Now, the only thing that made me like this one, because you move, it's so like spastic.
You tap and you go all the way to the top, and you tap and like all the way to the bottom.
Yeah, the only thing that makes this even worth it is the fact that if you get in any vehicle, you get an extra hit of damage. So you can like use that to just plow through something real quick.
Right.
And take the hit, to advance. That was the only thing that made that even worth it to me.
Yeah. Another really good one was his name is Grain Beat. It's kind of an odd name, but it has dual laser cannons that can be positioned above, below, or in front of the ship, which really is a very unique feature for this Bio Cyborg because it actually has no sub weapon.
Right.
All the other ones have like these different sub weapons, like we mentioned, the encircling bomb and being able to be invincible. This one, it just allows you to use that sub weapon to
and move your
position. Yeah,
they look like the things that kind of protrude from the mech look like little tuning forks.
Right.
I think it was Victor or maybe CTR said that when I was streaming the other day, and it kind of cracked me up because they look like these. Almost like a horseshoe, but more like a tuning fork.
Yeah, and since we can't unsee it, now you can't unsee it either.
Yeah.
But this was actually one of the first Bio Cyborgs that we noticed that if we damaged it, it changed it for when we took it over because it starts out with the 2 like tuning fork dual lasers, and if you shoot it a couple times, it loses 1. So then if you take it over, you start with just 1 instead of 2. So they don't completely repair, which I thought was a really neat aspect to this game. There's Titan, who was a very cool one. He had this like scythe laser that could shoot out. It was like this green sickle shape.
Yeah. I remember
And that one could actually shoot through obstacles, which was really nice to shoot enemies that were hiding behind things. And then he also has homing missiles. So this one was basically a flying tank. We really like that one a lot.
Yeah, but he's really thick, so it's hard to get through the obstacles.
I
pretty much lost him like within like 5 seconds.
Yeah. You just get them, spam their weapons, use their sub weapons, and you're probably going to lose them.
Yep.
There was also Neptune, who had a wave beam and 2 forward firing bombs. There was Baron, who has a machine gun and a downward firing grenade launcher, which the machine gun is kind of weak and the grenade launcher is not very useful because it just kind of shoots out and down. But against bosses, if you could get above them, it was pretty useful.
It's like he's taking a pee on somebody, dude.
Kind of, yeah.
It just kind of shoots out at a weird angle. And
it just drops down.
Yeah, I didn't really get that one.
And then the final one is Hyper D, which has diagonal cannons and a bomb that destroys enemy fire. I mean, this one moves really slow, but is really great for 2-player because then you can have a layer of support and defense with this Bio Cyborg.
Right. I think it takes a couple extra hits before it explodes.
And that secondary weapon that destroys enemy fire is pretty helpful.
Yeah. All right. So the look of this game, we talked about how the Super Nintendo version kind of lacked in the graphics department, but the game itself, the arcade version, is really pretty. And I think the game was done pretty well. Sometimes the backgrounds are a little bit bland. Not a lot going on. But other times they're like really detailed and really focused. And they have a very nice aesthetic to them.
Yeah, I think at first glance, the game feels kind of uninspiring, I guess.
Yeah.
But then as you start diving into it, you see all these little details, all the little touches, really crazy patterns and parallax scrolling going on in some levels. And then just when you look at all the different enemy types, there are so many different enemy types. I mean, not only the ones that you can take over, but there are a whole bunch of different types of sprites and environmental obstacles, asteroids, and these little things that don't do anything unless you shoot them and then they explode. It's very cool that there are enemies like that. There's so much variety in this game.
The levels themselves look a lot like R-Type. In fact, a lot of them look like they were kind of like yanked out of R-Type.
I can see that.
A little uninspiring. Again, the graphics they're nothing really great. They're not bad, but they're not really good.
Right. There's not a lot that makes you go, wow. I mean, like that Lightspeed animation was really cool where you warp to the next boss area, but it's solid and good and clean, great animations, but there's nothing that really makes you like pull someone next to you and say, hey, you got to check out this game.
Yeah. I would say that final boss is probably the coolest looking. It's like this, it looks like a humanoid, this gigantic human kind of thing with like this weird, like, I don't know, some like thing coming out of its mouth.
It kind of looks like a weird alien fighter pilot, but like if you've seen the movie Prometheus, it kind of looks like that, where it has like the muzzle thing that comes off. It looks kind of like a trunk type thing, but it's pretty neat. That boss is so cheap though. It's so bad.
Yeah, man, that made me actually dislike the game for that battle. I was just like, oh.
We spent so long just trying to beat that one. Yeah. So many quarters, probably as many quarters as the rest of the game took just to beat that.
And the problem is with the arcade version too. So when you're playing single player, as soon as you get a game over, as soon as you lose all your lives, you have to start back at the checkpoint, which is usually like mid level.
Right.
If you're playing 2 players though, and one player dies, he or she could insert a credit and continue jump right back into the action.
Right.
So when you and I were playing, we were trying to kind of feather the use of quarters so that we didn't both get a game over at the same time.
Right.
Because once you do, then you have to start at the mid boss. So we like intentionally commit suicide.
Yeah, we had strategic suicide points so that like I would have low number of lives, and then you would have high number of lives. So then I would die, get a game over before you lost all your lives, and then it would be flipped. So we actually got into doing that kind of late in the game, though. Yeah, we got quite a few game overs that we probably could have avoided.
Yeah, not how the game was intended to be played at all. Yeah, but that's how we found enjoyment in doing it. Otherwise, it's way too hard. The good takeaways from this, though, are the music and that opening cutscene. I think those make everything worth it.
Yeah, and it's a fun, different kind of shooter in a genre that's just kind of peppered with very much the same game.
The same thing. Anyways, let's get into the best part of the game, music. We got stage 4, I believe, which is called Fighting Machine.
You just heard the first section of Stage 4 called Fighting Machine, composed by Tsukasa Masuko for BlaZeon in the arcade.
Again, another really crunchy, cool track. Really heavy 80s guitar again. I mean, throughout the whole soundtrack. I noticed in a few tracks so far on the percussion line, sometimes he'll do that kick and the snare on the same channel. And then sometimes he'll mix it up and kind of put it on, channel 7 and 8. And, maybe to make them overlap a little bit. So I just find that, his use, depending on the track, depending on the intensity, and this one has a really intense, percussion line.
Yeah.
It really focuses on that. Depending on that, I think he kind of changes up his stance on how he wants to go about composing or writing that percussion line. Yeah,
I could definitely see using different things to make the intensity of the tracks up and down. I mean, this game has quite a bit of variety in intensity for a simple shooter. It has quite a nice variety in the tracks. This one, I really like this one a lot because of that 80s very synth rock feel. That's very it's very driving and
sounds like it could be in like a Sylvester Stallone movie or something in the 80s.
Yeah, that's kind of like my like go-to like vision in my head for like an 80s montage type song. Will it work for that? Okay, yeah, I think it does. I really love this track. But it's just so fun. I mean, it's incredibly crunchy in the beginning. It's like overly crunchy.
Yeah. The synths are really piercing.
Yeah, it's almost like something's wrong. And then that track really starts to kick up, and it really brings in that synth, that 80s feel. And I was just like, oh man, I'm in love with this track.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So next up, let's go to the second section of Stage 4, which is called Emergency Avoidance.
All right, that was the second section of Stage 4, titled Emergency Avoidance, composed by Tsukasa Masuko for BlaZeon.
This track I thought was kind of neat in the beginning. It almost felt like a beat 'em up or something. And then when the track really kicks up, it's like, oh, okay, I really get that space shooter vibe where it's very fast paced and energetic. Lots of notes, lots of everything going on. I really liked it.
Yeah, you know what I noticed is this is the only track really we've heard so far that the lead, well, I guess you can call it a lead, isn't heavily distorted. It's a lot more clean.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And even though, you know, the bass is still kind of crunchy and you got the supporting, you know, lines, the mid section is still a little bit fuzzy. That lead, the kind of scaling is very clean, very different. I like that.
Yeah, I think it kind of gives this track a little bit more of a faster paced feel, like things are going smoother, like maybe you're doing well.
Maybe you're avoiding something.
Yeah, you're emergency avoiding things. But yeah, I like that about this track. Now that you mentioned that, it definitely felt, you know, exceptionally clean compared to some of the other tracks.
Right. BlaZeon actually had a physical soundtrack release, but surprisingly not until 2011, published by Super Sweep, which was Shinji Hosoe's group. And you know, it's weird because BlaZeon was a pretty small dot on Atlus map.
Right.
Har har. So it seemed odd to release it so late, but I'm sure a lot of people at the time, like in 2011, were like, what is this? You know, because
right.
1992 and then all the way to 2011 doesn't hear anything. You know, you don't hear anything from it. And in Japan, soundtracks were released for just about everything.
Just about, yeah.
Yeah, so it just seems odd that they would release something so late. It was originally sold for 1,500 yen and was part of a collection basically called Game Music Discovery Series, and contained both the arcade and the Super Nintendo soundtracks. But it just feels, I don't know, it feels a little out of place. I'm just happy that they did bring something over.
Well, with the title of the Game Music Discovery Series, maybe they felt that this soundtrack was very, very good, and even though the game may not have been super popular, that people needed to discover this soundtrack and, you know, more work from this composer, especially as this composer grew with all the different major series of musics that he worked on.
Yeah, you know, Discovery Series, that's right. You know, like, the game was probably very easily overlooked. You know, arcade only, and then Super NES, people didn't really think about it maybe too much.
Yeah.
And then getting a physical release, people were like, hey, you know what, this music is really good. Let's kind of reintroduce it in. So I can see your point there.
It was probably some people like us that were just digging through obscure games that they never really played or people didn't hear a lot about, and they're like, wow, this soundtrack is awesome. Like, we know this composer, we didn't know that this game existed, and now we do, and we want other people to find out about it too. Or like,
why hasn't the soundtrack been released already?
Right.
Like, why not? Okay, let's go ahead and do it. So yeah, no, I mean, at least got a physical release somewhere, right? All right, let's get into Stage 5's theme. This is called Battle of Silence. All right, that was Battle of Silence from Stage 5, composed by Tsukasa Masuko for BlaZeon in the arcade.
It feels like you're suiting up for one last mission, like one last ride.
Yeah.
And I really like that feeling that gives you. The track is a little repetitive and doesn't go in a lot of different directions.
It's really simple,
Yeah, and it's very simple compared to some of the other tracks. There's no like major solos, and there's not a lot of complex notes going on, but it does have a really cool vibe to it that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's very atmospheric in a sense. It's funny because sometimes, both you and I are really into melody or something with a really awesome groove, and this doesn't have either of those.
Right.
But it has this really cool quality to it that, I don't know, especially hearing those synths just so strong and forceful and just really like, I don't know, it's almost like this is it. You're the last thing you're going to focus on. This is what this is everything it's come down to. And
right. I mean, it's level 5. All the levels have come up to this point, and now all you have to do is, go in there and execute. Yeah,
it almost kind of gives me like a horror movie kind of feel too.
I can see that with
like
that
the final
dun,
ending.
Dun, dun. It kind of reminds you of was it Friday the 13th? Wasn't that like Jason Voorhees thing? It was just like, it just was like a kind of an echoing note that you knew he was getting close. So.
Yeah, or I guess you could say like exploring a dungeon, like Dungeon Explorer.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
Very cool track, very different from what we've heard. The whole soundtrack, there's some stuff that sounds similar, some stuff that is just way out there, but altogether as a package, I think this just totally rocks.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more variety in the soundtrack than I had expected when we first decided to crack it open. I thought it was going to be a lot of like heavy rockin' tracks like you see in a lot of shooters. But there was a surprising amount of variety, and which leads me to think that there was a lot of thought and effort put into each of those different types of songs.
Yeah. Anyway, so today we covered BlaZeon for the arcade, composed by Tsukasa Masuko.
If you want to know more about the show, you can check us out online at pixelatedaudio.com for show notes and track lists. We can also be found on all of the major social medias like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon.
Yep. And if you guys like the show and you want to leave a review on iTunes, it's always appreciated. Want to give a shout out to Java Lens from Chile. He left us a really nice review. So we want to say thank you very much for that, taking the time out of your day and writing something for us. Also, we launched a Patreon, and if you are interested in supporting the show, it would mean a lot to us if you, check it out. And if something, catches your eye, feel free to put a few dollars our way. And it definitely helps, and it supports the show, and it keeps us energized to keep moving forward. And we want to say thank you to all of our current patrons.
Yeah, and it helps us bring many more amazing episodes towards you guys, and lots of different things we have planned in the future. It makes things easier, pumps us up, keeps us excited. So that's really awesome, and we thank you guys very much.
Yeah. So if you want to check that out, you can go over to pixelatedaudio.com. We have a link there, or you can go to patreon.com/pixelatedaudio. I think that's it.
Yeah.
I don't want to steer you guys wrong. Anyways, if you're new to the show, we got a lot of backlog.
Yeah, we're starting to get up there in the numbers now. We're approaching 100. So we wanted to highlight a few of our past recent episodes that we think you guys might like. We had a massive Lunar episode with composer Noriyuki Iwadare on the show, which we still can't believe that actually happened.
Yeah, what a cool guy. That was a fun interview.
Yeah, he even played some live instruments for us.
Which is the ocarina for us. That was awesome. And the trombone. Oh, if you guys didn't listen to the end, there is a little Easter egg at the end of that one. So check that out. It's very funny.
And then past that, we had a really fun PC-themed expansion pack and our second music disc volume. So we're kind of peppering in some more of those like offbeat episodes that are really fun, that kind of mix things up.
Yeah, and we got a lot of really cool stuff in the pipeline. Thank you guys so much for listening. What we're going to do is we're going to take out the show with the ending track from BlaZeon. It's called Hop, Step, Jump. It's really rad. Hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a few weeks for the next episode.